What's up, guys? It's Ryan Allred here with Pro Play Games. Today I'm going to be going over the expanded Turbo Darkrai deck. I played it this weekend at ARG Raleigh and finished in the top 4. It's a super fast, super aggressive deck that has pretty good matchups across the board. First, we're going to go over the deck list, and I'll go over some of the matchups, kind of go over how the deck works, some of its weaknesses and some of its strengths. So first, let's start by taking a look at the deck list. This is what we're working with. It's a pretty standard list. Obviously, since it's a Darkrai deck, kind of the core focus is around this Darkrai EX. The attack reads for 2 colorless energy, it does 20 damage plus 20 additional damage for every dark energy attached to any of your Pokemon. That's going to be kind of the core focus of the deck, is getting as much energy on the board as possible. The second attack here, Dark Head, can be useful because we have ways to put the opponent's Pokemon asleep. So it's kind of a fringe case, but there are a few times where that Dark Head's going to get you the knockout. Obviously, fighting is the weakness. There aren't a whole lot of fighting types right now to hit you, but when you do see them, they're going to hit you like a truck. The other Darkrai we play in this deck is from Dark Explorers. Mostly the reason we're playing this, almost exclusively the reason we're playing this, is for the Dark Cloak ability. It lets us retreat any of our Pokemon with a Dark Energy for free. We'll get to that a little bit later, but we're actually not playing any Float Stones or switching cards almost at all, so this Darkrai is going to be how we retreat our Pokemon. New to Burning Shadows, we have Darkrai GX. This helps us get all that energy on the board. The ability lets you take it from the discard and attach a dark energy that's in your discard and put them straight onto the bench. So it gets you an extra energy on the board for free just by having it at the discard. Beyond that, the first attack does 130, which, that helps set up some math. It doesn't quite get you a knockout, but sometimes it's good enough because when this Pokemon gets knocked out, you put them straight back on the bench, so you don't really lose a lot of energy. The GX attack is also ridiculously good. If the opponent's Pokemon is affected by a special condition, they just get knocked out. So it helps out when you have some Pokemon with like 200 something health. You have no way of knocking that stupid thing out. You can just use Dead End GX and bam, it's dead. It also lets you take care of things like Jolteon EX, where normally you wouldn't have much of a way of dealing with it. The way we get those Pokemon asleep is with Malamar EX. If we attach an energy to it, puts it to sleep, lets us use Dead End, it lets us use Dark Head if we need to. Malamar is super, super good. You'll see some lists playing the Hypnotoxic Laser instead. I really like Malamar a lot better. First off, it's less space. It's more consistent because you can search it out with Hoopa or Ultra Ball. And there are a couple of weird things where it helps out too. Like Gardevoir, if it's playing Wonder Energy, then there's this weird stuff that Malamar can go through, and Groudon, Primal Groudon would be a better example. You can't use Laser on Primal Groudon, so Malamar would be how you knock that out. For the counts, we have 3 of that original Darkrai and 1 Dark Cloak. You might see some people playing 2-2. Since both of these Darkrai EX have the same name, you can only play 4 total. Darkrai EX with the Dark Pulse ability is just so valuable that I think it's worth playing 3, even if it only means you get only have 1 Dark Cloak in the deck. In this deck, we're playing Hoopa. Hoopa EX lets us grab 3 EXs. That's super important turn 1. The reason being, you really need 2. You need to get the Dark Cloak Darkrai out, and you need to get the Dark Pulse Darkrai out. Beyond that, the Shaman helps because that lets you grab those 2 and then Shaman, so you can keep drawing. But there's just no easy way to get both of those Pokemon out the very first turn, and you really need to be able to start dealing damage. Speaking of which, we do play 2 Shaman EX. It just lets us go fast. We got to get as much energy on the board as fast as we can. We're going to be trying to go faster than our opponent, so having a liability on the bench doesn't matter because we're going to try and race them. We're going to try and win that race. Mew is here partially so we have a way to beat Gallade, and so we have a way to beat Marshadow GX. It lets us copy Darkrai's attack, so we can use this non-EX attacker. They only get 1 prize, and it hits those fighting Pokemon for weakness. so it takes a whole lot less to knock them out. The free retreat is nice too, because we don't always have Dark Cloak out, or we don't always want to attach to the active. So Mew helps out with that. A lot of decks in Expanded now are also playing Dimension Valley, so Mew can use all those attacks for 1 energy. One other kind of cute thing Mew can do is it can use our Oricorio's attack for 0 energy if they have a Dimension Valley in play. Oricorio is here almost exclusively for Night March. Night March is basically an unwinnable matchup without Oricorio. Even with Oricorio, it's a bad matchup. But Oricorio at least gives us a chance. It makes it, I actually ended up winning against Night March in Fort Wayne regionals because of this Oricorio. To be able to knock out a Darkrai without using Marshadow, they have to get a lot of Night Marchers in the discard. So Oricorio can really punish them for doing that. But also with Dimension Valley in play, it attacks for free. Sudowoodo. So this weekend at ARG Raleigh, everyone was playing Sudowoodo in their Darkrai decks. Mostly it's good for the mirror. You need so many bench Pokemon in play that without Sudowoodo you're gonna be at an extreme handicap. It also just helps against everything. So it limits them to 4 bench Pokemon, and since we're playing Skyfield in the deck, that means they don't get to take advantage of that, and we do. So it really takes them from 8 bench Pokemon to 4. That's just such a massive difference. We play 1 copy of Tapu Lele GX. 1 is really enough, to be honest. It helps with like a turn 1 Getsus or Guzma or Colress, something like that. Like we just really need that Pokemon or that supporter. But it's not something we're going to be using a whole lot, and we really can't afford the bench space. You'll see some people playing Jirachi EX instead, since we can search it out with Hoopa. I don't agree with that. I like the Tapu Lele better. I know I said having a liability on the bench isn't that big of a deal, but Jirachi's just really easy to knock out. And Tapu Lele can be really useful as an attacker sometimes too, because it's only 2 energy, and it can really punish decks that load energy on their Pokemon. Those are all the Pokemon. So we're playing 14 Pokemon. Moving on to the supporters, we play 3 Professor Sycamore, 2 copies of N, and Colress, 1 Colress. Those are our main draw supporters. In Expanded, you'll notice people don't really have to play a lot of draw supporters, just because we have access to VS Seeker, and it's just such a faster format that you don't reasonably expect to go through that many turns, where you'll need to play Sycamore 4 times, Sometimes that means you can get punished by decks like Trevenant, but we hit Trevenant for weakness, so I'm not going to worry that much about the matchup. It's already a good matchup. I'm playing 1 copy of Getsus in the deck. Getsus is a really cool card. Obviously, turn 1, that's what people think of with Getsus is turn 1. Turn 1, you can just shut someone out of the game if they don't have a supporter in their hand. That's really useful. It's also really useful later in the game. If you know your opponent, the only way they can really hurt you is with a Lysander or Guzma, and you notice those cards are already in the discard, if you play Getsus, you guarantee that Ultra Ball or VS Seeker is out of their hand. So VS Seeker would be how they get them out of the discard. The VS Seeker goes back into their deck, and you know that for at least 1 turn, they're not going to Lysander you. And also, if you see all their draw supporters are in the discard, you can kind of assume they're holding on to a VS Seeker instead because they think they're safe to keep that in their hand. And Getsus kind of punishes them for not playing the VS Seeker ahead of time. We play 1 copy of Hex Maniac. Hex is stupid good. There are just so many situations where your board is already set up. You don't really need anything. So Hex just lets you kind of punish your opponent for a turn to make sure they don't have a way of responding. In the mirror, it helps because it means they can't use Dead End GX unless they're playing the laser build of the deck, because they won't be able to activate Malamar's Hyper Hypnosis. So that can be huge. It also keeps them from getting draw cards really or retreating for free. It also helps immensely against Night March. If you play Hex Maniac, your opponent can't attack you with Marshadow because they can't use the ability that lets them attack. It'll also shut off Mew. I had a game in Fort Wayne playing against Night March where they didn't have any Night Marchers on the field because they had Mew and Marshadow. So I used Hex, and I guaranteed that they couldn't attack me the next turn, and it ended up winning me the game. Hex is just, it's super good. It's definitely worth the 1 slot. One kind of weird thing, I'm only playing 1 copy of Guzma. Definitely Guzma's better than Lysander in this deck, like, indisputably. There's too many times where you need to get your Pokemon out of the active, and we don't play any Float Stones or Switch or Escape Rope, so Guzma's really our only switching card. But I am only playing 1 copy. It's risky. It actually ended up costing me my game against Grant Manley and Swiss at ARG Raleigh round 1 because it was my 6th and final prize to win the game. So it can hurt you if you prize it, but honestly, you deal so much damage that you're more likely to want to deal with the active threat than to try and steal a knockout, So you can kind of assume that at some point you'll get Guzma in the discard, and you'll just use VS Seeker for Guzma for game. That's really how you're expecting to use Guzma is for those final prizes. For a stadium count, we're playing 2 copies of Skyfield. Skyfield, like I said, it lets you load up your bench. Since we're playing Hoopa, lets us get those Darkrai's out. It lets us use our Darkrai GX because our bench just gets full so fast. One thing to kind of be aware of is that your opponent probably will bump your Skyfield out of play. So try not to put more than 5 Pokemon on the bench that you actually want. If you load up your bench with 8 really good Pokemon and they bump your stadium, they all end up in your discard. And we don't play any Pokemon recovery cards in this deck. So once a Pokemon hits your discard, it's not coming back out unless it's that Darkrai GX. So just that's something you kind of want to be conscious of. But on the flip side of that, you do want to keep more than 5 Pokemon in play if you have Shaman or Hoopa in play, because you want to be able to bump those off your bench if they get rid of your stadium. So that can be pretty big too, especially when you're playing against Trevenant, because Trevenant usually relies on using Necrozma GX to knock out your Pokemon, but it also needs the Dimension Valley to attack. So if you load up your bench all the way, after they've started putting some damage on your Pokemon, the only way they can knock you out with Necrozma is by playing the Dimension Valley and letting you discard all of those Pokemon that they were trying to knock out. So that can be pretty big in that matchup too. We play 4 copies of VS Seeker. That's pretty standard. I've seen some people trying to play 3 VS Seekers in different decks. I can see where that's probably correct in some decks. I still don't like it, but I definitely don't like 3 VS Seekers in this deck. It's just, like I said, we're playing aggressive, we're playing fast, and we don't really have to worry about Trevenant anyway. So we can afford to play 4 VS Seekers. We have 4 Ultra Balls. Again, super, super standard. You'll see 4 Ultra Balls in almost everything. The turbo part of Turbo Darkrai is that we play 4 copies of Max Elixir to let us get energy onto the bench, and we play 4 copies of Dark Patch. Both of these cards, Dark Patch lets us get energy out of the discard to put on a Dark Pokemon. Max Elixir lets us try and pull energy out of the deck to attach to our bench Pokemon. 4 and 4 again, you got to play that. We have Dowsing Machine as our ace spec card. Mostly that's so that we can get an extra Dark Patch or sometimes Elixir if you need to, attack with Mew or something like that. Computer Search is usually going to be the better ace spec, but in this deck, it's turbo. We're worrying about Dark Patch and Max Elixir. So this gives us 9 copies of those instead of just 8. It can also be used to grab a supporter that we've already discarded, so sometimes it can be Dowsing Machine for Guzma for games, something like that. We play 1 Field Blower. Field Blower can be super big to knock off Fighting Fury Belts because, we have a pretty easy time hitting 180, maybe 190, but if we're trying to hit 230 damage, it's just not practical. So Field Blower lets us bump those off. It also lets us get rid of Garbotoxin if we're playing against a Garbodor deck. And, people play so many choice bands and tools like that if you can bump their choice band, it might let you survive an extra turn. We have 3 copies of Battle Compressor. I had tested the deck with 2 before, and usually turn 1, even turn 2, you just need to hit a Battle Compressor so badly. It's such a big deal. And later in the game, the second Battle Compressor is going to be good too, because it lets you get your Darkrai GX and your Dark Energy into the discard so that you can Dark Patch. And then late game, it lets you thin your deck so that you have a higher chance of hitting the cards you need. With Choice Band, we're playing 2 copies of that. Choice Band lets us hit a lot of numbers that we couldn't otherwise. 190 can be big for some of the big GXs. 170 for Tapu Lele. I kind of do the math based on how much energy is on the board. And so I always remember that if I'm trying to knock out another Darkrai, I need either 8 energy in play or 7 energy and a Choice Band. So Choice Band lets us need 1 less energy. And something like a Tapu Lele, we only need 6 energy in play and a Choice Band. And 6 energy can be pretty easy to get. It's crazy that like turn 1, turn 2, getting 6 energy in play really isn't that hard, but that's how the deck works. Finally, we play 12 Darkness Energy. Originally, I tested it with 13. You know, if I could put 61 cards in the deck, I would have 13 Darkness Energy, but unfortunately, there just isn't the space for it. I would say 12 is definitely the bare minimum you want to play in this deck, though. Anything less than that and your max elixirs are just never going to hit. And, you know, if you're not hitting your max elixirs, you're not getting energy in play, nothing's really working. But, you know, especially in the expanded format, there's so many good cards that you just don't have space for everything you want. So everything kind of ends up having lower counts than you would expect in standard, compared to standard at least. So the 12 Dark Energy lets us get everything in play. So that's the deck. Like I said, I really like the deck. This weekend I played it at ARG Raleigh. I finished in the top 4 and lost my top 4 match against Grant Manley. Actually, a majority of the people in the tournament were playing Turbo Darkrai. It's a really popular deck. It's fast, it's strong, and it has really good matchups. About the only bad matchup for it is Night March, that you would expect to see regularly. But, you know, for almost everything, it's at least even. Kind of the core strategy of the deck is just to, you know, it's pretty simple. Load up your field with as much energy as possible, and then knock out the opponent's Pokemon. It's a pretty cool deck, like I said. I'm right now looking at playing it for Daytona. I still haven't, you know, made my decision yet. We got another 2 weeks, and I'll probably wait until the last minute to actually pick a deck list. But kind of the big thing to worry about is, like I said, Night March. I'm putting the Oricorio in there because at least gives you a fighting chance. Golisopod can be kind of a scary matchup too, just because you have a hard time knocking that out. It's 210 damage, and they can just keep Acer rolling and make sure that you never keep any damage on the board. Against Trevenant, like I explained earlier, their kind of path to victory is hitting you with Trevenant 3 times and then using Necrozma, and then trying to just like take 6 prizes in 1 turn. As long as you can kind of manage your bench and manage your Skyfield so that they can't keep energy on the board and attack you at the same time, you should do okay. But if they go first and get the item locked down and you just have to draw and pass for a few turns, that might end up costing you the game. The other big deck to worry about is always Garbodor variants. I didn't think they were that bad to play against. Fortunately, you resist, so they do 20 less damage from the get-go. And you kind of can afford not to play a lot of items. You know, you want to play Battle Compressor to get your Darkrai GX into play, stuff like that. But well, once you get going, you know, you're dealing damage just by what you have on the board, not what you need to play every single turn. Kind of variations on the deck. I've seen people playing the Baby Eviltal from XY. It's a great card. For 1 energy, it does 30 damage and lets you accelerate energy. The problem is getting it active early enough to matter. Turn 1, if you can attack with Yveltal, that's great. That's going to accelerate energy. But later on in the game, you're going to be trying to take big knockouts, and Yveltal doesn't do that for you. So it can kind of look like a dead card. Um, it is a 1-prize attacker, so you can kind of force a 7-prize game. But in Expanded, people have just too much access to Guzma or Lysander. So what ends up happening is you attack with it, they Lysander around it, they're up 2 prizes, you didn't take a prize, and you end up losing that race that the deck fights so hard to maintain. And the mirror can be kind of a fun match. The biggest thing you want to focus on is that Pseudo-Wudo. If you can get Pseudo-Wudo out before they play Hoopa, you put them at an extreme handicap, and you kind of force them to play their own Pseudo-Wudo if they have the bench space for it. Because if you can put 8 Pokemon down and they only get 4, you're going to win the matchup pretty much. The Darkrai GX's GX attack can be super big too. If you don't quite have the math for a knockout, Darkrai GX can help. And it's also great if they knock out your Pokemon, you can put him straight back on the bench. So you only lose 2 energy by him getting knocked out. Whereas if something with a bunch of energy gets knocked out, you lose all that energy, and it ends up setting you back on your damage output. That was the Turbo Darkrai deck. Thanks again for watching. This was brought to you by Pro Play Games and Ultra Pro. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep watching.